Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to invite all of you for our first formal webinar of New Delhi, India chapter of the FENG. And what better than having a topmost professional and a known personality in India, Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti, join us and guide us on a sensitive and, of course, a rich topic like ESG to be discussed about today. Um, for today's webinar, I will propose the following flow. So I'll give a very brief introduction about Mr. Shailesh, and then I will pass it over to him, and he could, guide us about the topic at hand. And then, if he allows and if he thinks best, maybe we could take up the questions at the end of the session. All right. So I'll start with it. I think in terms of introducing Mr. Shailesh. So Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti is a professional from India. He is a chartered accountant, a cost accountant, a certified internal auditor, financial planner, and a fraud examiner as well. Besides being an independent director of global and Fortune companies across industries, across geographies. He has been conferred with the Global Competent Boards designation, which is GCBT, by competent boards. There is a web link which I've shared over chat box here. You could have a detailed look at his profile. So he has an excellent and illustrious career spanning 4 decades, uh, coming from a family of chartered accountants. His father was a chartered accountant who started the entire firm called Shailesh Haribhakti and Associates, of which Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti is the chairman now. As I mentioned, he has many other directorships and non-executive chairmanship of companies across industries and geographies. The activities where he is largely involved include like digital board governance, medium and small enterprises, verification, diligence, and everything around it, data-led lending and counterparty assessments, business transformation projects, and of course, last but not the least, in terms of his passion for teaching, for writing, and public speaking. So you could really look him up over Google and have a look around what all he has written and the knowledge sharing he has been doing over his entire life. For me personally, it is a matter of honor to have him for this particular webinar. I know him for like decades, and what better moment than this one for having him on board here. So, Mr. Shailesh, please, we invite you for this webinar. Welcome aboard, and I pass it on to you to please enlighten us on the topic at hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vineet. And first of all, congratulations on being appointed chairperson of the New Delhi chapter of FENG. It's such a pleasure to meet this very well-knit group of your colleagues from all over the world. And I'm particularly pleased that we have people from the US, from Malaysia, and it's such a delight. I have such a fantastic memory of my 1 year and 2 months spent in and around Chicago. Of course, I drove 25,000 miles that year, creating a huge carbon footprint. But because wherever I needed to go, if I needed to go to New York, I would just pick up my car and drive from Chicago. So it was a fun 14 months that I had there. But today's subject is, and I would like you to please interrupt me wherever and whenever. I love a dialogue. There's no need for me to be speaking for whatever period and then all of you waiting for the thoughts to come back to you. Just stop me whenever you want, raise your hand or just signal to me that you would like to ask a question, and I'm very happy to be interrupted at any point in time.
Thank you.
Having said that, let me create a context for today's talk. If you ask me what was the most significant risk that the planet faced in the last year, I would not pick COVID-19 as my number one choice. I would pick climate change as my number one choice of the largest risk that the human race got in touch with and decided to take concerted action about. I think so many events happened during the period that focused all our mind and attention on it.
Yeah.
The critical one of it was the fact that as a result of the stoppage of work and the stoppage of movement of aircraft and cars and all of that, the lockdowns which happened all over the world, we suddenly had a precipitous drop in the pollution levels that we were facing in many parts of the world. And we discovered accidentally the joys of a cleaner environment, better air to breathe, cleaner water to drink, and all of that. And because we saw that, we saw a glimpse of what can change and what that change can do for us. We focused our mind and attention, and very quickly, a whole lot of things changed around climate action, including the fact that we had a new president of the United States who believes in fighting the ill effects of climate change. And I think that was a very significant change that happened in the world. But even before Joe Biden got elected, the entire mind and attention was focused on climate change. And I will create for you all the 4 critical aspects that are going to inform the debate on ESG as we go forward for the next few years. The first one of them is obviously climate action. And I will give you 2 or 3 examples of multinationals from across the world who have taken this action and have really pushed it down into their DNA in terms of concerted strategic actions to make sure that they make a difference to their footprint, their carbon footprint. So the first is, of course, climate action and climate change. The second is the complete transformation of supply chains. You know, at one point, the given wisdom was that we should try and cite manufacturing and sourcing from wherever in the world it was least expensive to manufacture or source.
Right.
And suddenly, as China became a difficult place from which to source or through which to have your supply chain, the world started thinking about what is now being categorized as supply chain localization and supply chain resilience. So if you can find, as in the past, the same economies of economic efficiencies, if you were to source from multiple parts of the world, the search started intensely for how to localize the supply chains. And one of the things that happened, for example, in India, is the announcement of a scheme by the government of India, which is going to encourage domestic manufacturing by localizing supply chains. So the supply chain has become the second big factor that is pushing new action on ESG. The third big situation that has emerged is a complete transformation of geopolitics. The relationships between China and America have pivoted phenomenally. What used to be a relationship of mutual dependency suddenly became an adversarial relationship. And that has had its impact across the globe. Simultaneously with that unraveling, we had between India and China a more or less a very difficult situation at our borders, and we are just about dousing those fires, and the dialogue has thankfully reopened, and we hopefully should have a different kind of relationship. But while all this was happening, huge new trade agreements got sorted out. And so the Pacific Alliance, if you like, and the ASEAN free trade agreements and free trade agreements between bilateral countries and all of that suddenly took off. And we had a completely different reordering of trade. That also has massive impacts on ESG action.
Sure.
And the fourth, and perhaps a very critical factor that is playing a big role, is mergers and acquisitions and a reordering of the ownership patterns of corporations across the world. The world experienced a 3x growth in recorded M&As in the year 2020, largely driven by the fact that because of COVID and because of the lockdowns and so the world got divided into two components. One, which decided to focus on health, cash, and cost, and the other, which got disrupted and was about to fall apart. And so there was a huge amount of M&A activity, fueled quite significantly by these SPACs, which have become part of everybody's vocabulary. So the special purpose acquisition company, which is also called a blank check company, where the purpose for which the resources which are committed is not pre-specified, but you could pull in multiple entities from across the globe and list it in one of the international bourses, whether it's in Singapore or Hong Kong or US or wherever. And that has led to a phenomenal amount of M&A activity. Now, how is all of this relevant to ESG? So let me give you a brief current history of how the ESG conversation has suddenly become top table conversation. So we should go back to, I think it was about September of 2019, when the Business Roundtable in the United States, Jamie Dimon took the chairmanship and talked about purpose-led governance. And that changed the conversation almost completely. Because Milton Friedman's old dictum that all activity must be directed towards shareholder value enhancement suddenly got transformed to thinking about purpose-led attention to all the people who are participating as economic interests in any organization. Also, a new expression entered our vocabulary, the license to operate. Every business has virtually a license to operate in the community, in the space, in the environment in which it operates. And suddenly the attention shifted from the entity to the ecosystem in which the entity actually performs its activities. So that was the starting point of the accelerated debate on ESG. Up until then, and for another year, there were several organizations, not-for-profits across the world, which had created multiple ways in which you could think about sustainability, think about environmental impacts and how to measure them and what to do about them and how to report them. So there was an alphabet soup of 5 different organizations, NGOs, which had put up their hands to set the standards on how the world should deal with this new subject. As a result of all the push in terms of the context that I created and the push given by the Business Roundtable, they decided to come together and merge and establish what is now going to be called the Value Reporting Foundation. And that is going to be established somewhere in the United States this year. Simultaneously, the World Economic Forum took up this issue and got all the big four accounting firms in the world to set up a series of measurement tools and matrices, which would be used to measure the impacts of actions of various corporations in the context of ESG. And again, the world decided that you need a single set of standards to report and to actually measure and think about sustainability. So the Sustainability Standards Board will be established this September in London under the aegis of the International Accounting Standards Board, which will, in a single-minded manner, establish global single standard on sustainability measurement, sustainability reporting. So we now have the infrastructure pieces in place. We have the four forces which are driving it. We've got risk which arose embedded into our thinking. And so the world is now getting into the action mode on ESG. So what is the expression of that action? And what has it done to all our thinking and all the way that we actually operate our businesses? It has made us stop thinking about the year, the 365 days, as a unit of measurement for our outcomes, for our impact, for what we are doing to the world. What is our interaction with the world? So different companies have begun to take different periods of time during which they will reach net zero emissions in the language of ESG.
Right.
That is where this expression net zero comes from. So for example, China announced that by 2050, the entire country would be net zero. So our Prime Minister Modi, he went out and said that we will do it 10 years before China, that India will become net zero by 2040. But let's leave aside the competition between nations. US has not yet announced when they will become net zero. Hopefully, Joe Biden will announce it at some point in time. But individual corporations. So for example, Unilever has a very short period during which they want to get to net zero. They want to get to net zero by 2030. Holcim, Lafarge Holcim, just declared last year in 2020 that they will get to net zero by 2035. And similarly, Amazon and all the big boys of high tech, Microsoft and Google, and all of them made their own declarations. And each one, there was a competition as to who would get there first. So they decided to commit that from the beginning of time, when they started operating, whatever was their carbon footprint, they would negate it. So the big boys of high tech decided to take that very big leap of faith and commit that their carbon footprint would get eliminated from the beginning of the time that they started to operate. Now, once you have made these commitments, you need to find ways to actually put them together. So let me give you three the experience of three companies that I'm aware of, because all three of them have put out very outstanding integrated reports, which report on what actions they have taken, how they have turned out to be, and what is it that it has resulted in. So I'll start with Lafarge Holcim, whose two Indian boards I sit on. And I want to share with you the multiple things that Lafarge Holcim and our two Indian companies have done to make a huge impact and a big difference to ESG. So you can think about it in terms of four large initiatives. So the first initiative was to see how we could use municipal waste and fly ash into our manufacturing process and reduce the level of air pollution that these factors cause. You know, methane is automatically released when you have municipal waste accumulating in large landfills. So one of the things that our company is committed to is we will gather municipal waste and use that as alternative fuel to be burned into our kilns. So what was a big symbolic action that Ambuja Cement actually did, and it was visible to many of us who are in India, and I'm sure Mr. Amitabh Khanna and Vineet must have seen what was actually demonstrated by Ambuja Cement. So there was a very large match between, in India, cricket is the biggest religion, if you like. I mean, the sport of cricket is played at huge scale. So in the new Narendra Modi Stadium, after the cricket match, Ambuja Cement took on the task of collecting all the waste that was littered across the stadium. And within a few hours of the conclusion of the match, the entire waste was picked up, put into barrels, compacted, and burned in our kilns. And so there was an auto cleanup of a very major footprint that was visibly left. Second initiative that we took is that fly ash, which is a byproduct of producing fossil fuel based power,
Right.
needs to be watered in order to make it transportable by rail. So we took up the initiative of watering the fly ash where it was found, creating a sludge, putting it into rail wagons and transporting it to our plants all over the country, 26 different plants, so that we could then install dryers at the receiving point and make sure that that fly ash got compacted and utilized as fuel alternative, as part of the additive material to manufacture cement. So these are visible symbols of what can be done if you set your mind to it. Now, the big question that arises, and today was the annual general meeting of Ambuja Cement, where the three institutional investors came to the annual general meeting and asked the question, what does it cost you to get to your net zero? And the amazing answer that we could give is that there is a profit from actually being so environmentally conscious, because the cost of using this alternative fuel is already lower than the cost of burning coal, which is the other way in which you can run your kilns, because you have to heat the kiln up to massive temperatures. And similarly, fly ash as an additive creates a far better cost metric and a strength metric for the cement As all, I mean, again, all those who are in India know that the compressive strength of the Ambuja cement is its big marketing branding uh, sort of, they lead with that as the major strategic commitment that they make. And so, very interestingly, to be climate conscious, to be ESG compliant, does not cost. It is actually delivering an economic benefit. That is the big takeaway that I would leave with all of you on the call this evening. That it is not a cost. It is actually, if it is factored into your DNA, then you can actually make a big difference to the way that you actually deliver your economic results. So we had the highest profit margin ever this year. And we had a massive EBITDA margin, which was the second highest that we had ever delivered. And we delivered the largest dividend ever paid out by this company this year. So it's not as if becoming conscious about ESG actually raises your cost. It can improve your profitability. And that's the big message that we would like to leave behind. In addition, we do actions on various fronts. All our supply chains are free of any accusation of human rights violations, of child labor, of making sure that safety is accurate. One of the big points which was reported in our integrated report at the end of the year is that we had 0 fatalities, and that the safety environment, people felt more safe during COVID to go to office and to operate the cement plants than to stay at home. They felt safer to be actually operating. And all of this resulted in better utilization, higher activity, and higher profits. Of course, 2 other initiatives that we are actually participating in are to raise the water table in the whole dry Saurashtra region of Western India. We have raised the water table to such an extent that if you were to travel there, and if you have been traveling there over a period of time, you'll start seeing the actual visible impact of greener fields, better crops, more successful and economically enhanced outcomes for the people. So they're all building their pakka homes. So you can see all of this, it's right there, visible. We've converted the holes that were dug because of our mining into lakes, and we've started attracting birds to those water bodies. So all of this action. Yes, Vineet, you want to ask a question? You're on mute. You're on mute.
I'm saying that Mr. Amitabh Khanna has raised his hands. I think he has some question for some time now.
Sorry. Yes, please, Amitabh. Sorry, I didn't notice that. My mistake.
It's okay. So
yes,
basically,
Amitabh.
I do keep abreast of the ESG initiatives which are happening. I have 2 homes, one in the UK and one in Delhi. At the moment, I'm in the UK, and I noticed the difference in the quality of air, of course, here. But more importantly, we have 6 or 7 metros, or let's say cities of very large size in India, where you have huge amounts of, let's say, city waste. New Delhi, I don't know whether you're familiar, has a place called Ghazipur, where the mountain is getting taller, and they say, soon it will be as high as Qutub Minar. And I'm very worried that many of the CSR initiatives have kind of missed, let's say, low-hanging fruits such as this. And whilst I am very happy to actually see the usage of fly ash, and actually thermal plants are more or less shut out now in Delhi and most big cities, this huge mountain of garbage waste needs to be tackled urgently. And I'm wondering whether, L&T through your initiatives and also Ambuja Cement can actually help these cities to actually reduce this huge garbage mountain.
Absolutely. What a fantastic question, Mr. Khanna. This is one of our key initiatives. We want to raise the percentage of alternative fuel, as we call garbage, to at least 10% of the total fuel that we consume. Today, we are at some 6 to 7%. So we want to raise it by 50% in the next 1 or 2 years. So we are on a very aggressive move towards using up this municipal garbage. And we want to see how we can extract this garbage from landfills and actually compact it and burn it. The problem is that we don't have alert citizens. We don't have the awareness even to separate garbage. Yeah. Even though garbage separation bags are provided and bins are provided, the culture of being engaged in this at grassroots level is still to take root. And this is something that your organization, the FENGs, could take charge of this. And actually, at such a level of community engagement, it becomes important that everybody separates garbage. So we did this at a small city level through ACC Cement. So we took a very small city called Madukkarai, which is on the border of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And we transformed Madukkarai into heaven on earth. This is a story that was told by a 7-year-old child, a young girl. And we made a whole film around it as to how Madukkarai got transformed into heaven on earth in the mind of that 7-year-old girl. Because people started doing all of this. They started separating garbage. They stopped throwing plastic on the road. They did not permit all of this poor hygiene to actually continue. Every home in Madukkarai started having potted plants. There was vertical agriculture. There was soilless agriculture, which got seeded. We had vermiculture plants. We had manure, which we were distributing. Every person in that small town got engaged in picking up garbage, in wearing clean clothes, in making things happen. It is so important to get the community engaged. And that's where we need these stories to be told and repeated. So we do a whole lot of storytelling. If you go to the websites of Ambuja and ACC, you will see these stories and these short films everywhere, which tell you what is it that we as individuals can do. What is it that anywhere, whatever work you are doing, you can engage with in order to make the difference. But the point you make is so important. We just need to get these landfills emptied. And it is possible if steel companies and cement companies put their minds to it to make a difference. Yes, Mr. Ashok, please ask your question.
Okay, I'm Ashok Khanna, also a Khanna, but I'm in Boston, Massachusetts. You mentioned two things. One was that when you cleaned the stadium up and you compacted the trash, you burnt it. When you burnt it, what was how did you control the emissions from the burns? Because in Massachusetts, here in our town, we had a place where we used to burn the trash, but it caused so much pollution and the emissions that we wound up shutting it down. So that's
very good question. Very good question, Mr. Khanna. Let me address it, because this is done in controlled conditions in a kiln. There is no outward emission from this AFR that is burnt. And what we do is we have natural removal of the soot from the outflow of the gas that goes out, and we clean it. So we have installed equipment to clean every piece of the emission. So if you visit any plant of any of the cement companies, either ACC or Ambuja, we used to pride ourselves saying that we can grow a rose garden under our kiln. And we actually demonstrated it. So this is the real reason why we need the cooperation of industry to burn it under controlled conditions and make sure that what is emitted out is clean.
So you
And
have to have
that's the big
scrubber
difference.
technology.
You need to have investment and
Well,
technology.
scrubber technology is the best thing that you can do for emission
We've got
control.
scrubbers all over the place in every plant.
The other
So that-
thing was that talking about this huge pile of trash in Delhi, when the company I was with here till I retired, I was senior vice president director of a company called Stone and Webster and Parsons Brinkerhoff, where we did most of the engineering projects that you think of in Delhi, the Delhi airport, the Delhi metro and Mumbai metro and all that. One of the things we did when we did the big dig here in Boston was we heaped all the trash that was dug out and it was converted into a golf course and
Wow.
into a very good golf course. Now, I know that we are always lacking for green space. Why can't something like that be handled in Delhi? I was in Delhi last year for a very long time because of the COVID. We were stuck there for over 5 months, which was nice because we have our own house in Delhi, so we were able to just stay in the house. But the clean air during the COVID was absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I'd never seen that clean air since I left India in the late 60s to go and study.
You're so right. All of us felt it in Mumbai. From my home, I could see two ends of Mumbai, actually, which I'd never seen before. In my entire stay in my home, I'd never seen it. It was possible only because of the fact that we had so much less pollution during that period of lockdown. And that's what gave all of us. But the point you're making is the great point of getting the community engaged and involved. There is no shortcut.
Yeah.
It is not possible for anybody to do it all by themselves. We need to collaborate. We need to bring it all together. And we need the larger corporations to take the initiatives, to create the awareness, to tell the stories, to keep at it, to report it. And that's why this whole movement, in India, the top 1,000 companies will now have to voluntarily provide a business responsibility, and BRSR it is called, it's a business responsibility and sustainability report. Every one of the 1,000 companies, top 1,000 companies listed in India will have to come out with this, first voluntarily for 1 year, and then mandatorily. And then this will get extended to every listed company and every other company, so everywhere in the world, this kind of standard setting, this kind of voluntarism, this kind of community effort will be required to make the change happen. So thank you for both those inputs. Don, you wanted to say something. I really like your 3 phrases of clean the world. Why don't you say it? Because perhaps you will say it the best. Don Piper?
Yes, yeah. I put a link in
yes, I saw.
Chat box. Yes, this is a process that we've spent now 12, 13 years on. We have scientists from all around the world and proposals in 25 different locations around the world, from the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean, West Africa, the South Pacific. And we have 2 proposals in front of the UN Ocean Decade right now for installing these systems. One location in Fiji that will be led by the University of South Pacific, and one location in West Indian Ocean that will be led by a group in Zambia. It's a compelling technology. We also incorporate into the total system alum cycle and hydrothermal liquefaction to burn garbage and human waste, and separating out the urine and pasteurizing it to take it back to the seaweed forests for additional food. So it's a totally balanced system that requires monitoring of all of the inputs and outputs, not just from the seaweed and the shellfish, but from the microbes and the bacteria that live on them, as well as the fish, free swimming fish that swim in and out of, underneath and around these flexible floating fishing reefs. Each reef is 500 meters in diameter, which means it's about 20 hectares or 50 acres. And we put matrices of 100 of these together. And the economics work out that with an initial investment of $10 million to build the first 2 of these reefs, after that, they generate enough income that you can borrow money to build out the remaining 98 reefs. And by the 9th year, 100 reefs are generating $100 million in free cash flow on initial $10 million investment.
Fabulous. What a story. I wish, Dawn, that more and more such stories not only get created, but reported and shared across the world. And I believe that that's the real route that will start cascading all these thoughts around the world, and people will move into creating wealth out of waste. And I think that's something that Israel has learned so well. And yesterday I was in conversation with an Israeli company which is doing exactly that. And they are pulling out waste and converting it into wealth in very, very creative ways. So no, these are the stories that need to be told across the world. But let me quickly go to the other 2 examples, one of Unilever and the other of Amazon, and what they have done to make the difference in the ESG space. So Unilever decided to completely reinvent and become a clean cleaning company. So they have made, as I said, the nearest term commitment to zero, net zero. And so they reinvented their product, they reinvented the packaging, so it was biodegradable, it was not plastic. They've reinvented their supply chains. They have gone into supply chain localization, the kind of thing that we talked about. They've reduced the transport or the distance between where products are manufactured and actually delivered. So the manufacturing point to the consumption point, they've decided to cut down. This, by the way, is also something that Ambuja and ACC are working on, to make sure that you simply don't need to transport over long distances, either your raw material or your finished product. You localize it so that you save your footprint. So Unilever decided to do all of this in addition to all their human rights and social responsibility issues. And of course, they were the earliest people to sign on to the Business Roundtable's commitment to stakeholder capitalism as opposed to shareholder-based capitalism. So they have gone through the entire ESG process, and they are amongst the world's leaders in this space. Amazon equally has done phenomenal work in reducing the time that it takes to deliver anything from any part of the world to any other part. And they have now brought a combination of VTOLs and drones and solar-powered vehicles and autonomous vehicles and EV vehicles. They've experimented with all of this. All this may sound future-oriented technology, but it is there right now, right there in their supply chains. And therefore, Amazon Prime is perhaps the biggest profit machine that Amazon has embedded in it. And that has a phenomenal capability to reduce their carbon footprint. So as we can see, it is not necessary to think of ESG in terms of cost. It is equally important and possible to think of ESG as an economic emancipation kind of agenda. And if these stories are replicated, told, and shared across the length and breadth of your network, you could be doing a phenomenal service to the world. And I will end my formal conversation with you by just summarizing that ESG needs to get into the DNA of each one of us. It has to start from every person. Each one of us must feel it. Each one of us must feel the responsibility to our planet because that's our only home. And we need to then cascade it to the communities that we can influence and make sure that the stories get written, they get told, and that all regulatory and legal initiatives that the world begins to take, we support wholeheartedly to make sure that those will then translate into true action and outcomes of the kind that Mr. Khanna experienced in Delhi, I experienced in Bombay, and I'm sure everybody living wherever they are experienced during the last year when we had a respite from all the pollution that we naturally today engage in. So with that, I will open it up to the last few questions, if any, or a summarization so that we can end on time at 8 o'clock.
Sir, I have written
Paul,
a question in the chat box. Could you tell us the name of few ESG companies with which the finance professionals like us can collaborate to make the project reports and financials? So essentially, you know, while this entire thing is going on and people are doing research, studies, making the reports, do you see any possibility for people like us to collaborate and work together? And what will those specific companies we could look up or maybe try to contact?
so there is a very long list of
At a global
companies
level,
which
sir,
are,
at least maybe a few names, yeah.
so GIST is one, which is established, GIST, which is established in Switzerland. It has a footprint in London, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, and in India in a very big way. All the big four have got very specialist services. Firms like ours, we do a whole lot of work in this area. Thara was on this call for a while. She works very closely with me on our ESG initiatives. And you will find that working or collaborating with internal sustainability divisions of companies can be the best bet for professionals such as yourselves who are part of a network. I would say that that's the best source of engagement for a community such as yours.
Right. And so one
there
more
are many.
thing,
There is
while
TTC, and there is so many organizations all over the world which have sprung up to do this
thanks for
work.
that. So other question is that while companies are doing all these studies and research and maybe projects more importantly, and incurring costs, right, at a corporate level, are these costs getting passed on to the consumers?
Actually, you know, it's interesting that you asked that question, because as I said, it is not a cost. It actually reduces cost. The world can actually find a path to hyper disinflation while they are reducing carbon footprint.
Right.
That is the amazing story of our time that we are missing. That's the point we are missing.
Right.
That's what we need to turn it on its head.
Absolutely.
I just told you why Ambuja had the best year in history.
Right.
Because they got significantly associated with ESG. It's not a cost. it's a new way of operating, which just takes away cost.
Absolutely.
And Dawn demonstrated it by saying that on a 10 million investment, they turned in cash flows of 100 million. It's 10x. That's an exponential organization right there.
It's actually a return on the investment rather than
absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
I'm sure very soon there will be some parameter of ROI on the ESG, unless it's already there.
So no, it's not measured in those terms. It is measured in terms of outcomes to inputs. So, and in any case, we are still experimenting. I have proposed that we blockchain the entire process of capturing data sets which recognize the creation or the deltas that are happening in the 6 capitals. And that is going to be the new story that we will all be hearing about as we go forward. So then there will be a blockchain and there will be 6 capitals. Yes, Dawn, please tell me.
The other thing is that you can't really put a value to the benefits that the society as a whole gets out of in terms of health, in terms of environment, in terms of everything. You cannot just bean count everything from ROI standpoint. You have to look at the broader picture and say, hey, how are we benefiting the society at large and ourselves? Return on investment, yeah, that's for us bean counters who always think about. But I think we have to get out of that frame of mind and look at the broader picture.
Yes.
I put a reference in the chat box to an excellent resource in this regard called Firms of Endearment by Raj Sisodia, Jacques Seth, and David Wolf. I use that as a textbook in teaching the MBA class at Bainbridge Graduate Institute, Sustainable Entrepreneurship and Entrepreneurship. And it documents the top 28 leading companies around the world that apply these principles and at the same time are the leading companies, both in terms of market value and profits in each of their industries. The reason being that because of the way that they are honoring the ESG principles, it reduces their marketing costs, it improves their reputation among the industry and their customers. It improves the attitudes, the resilience of their employees. They have a relationship with their local community, and it all falls down to the bottom line. When I first started teaching this in 2005, everybody shook their heads and said, no, you're spending the shareholders' money in a bad way, and you shouldn't be able to do that. Well, it wasn't until 2012 that Forbes finally came out with a quote that said, if sustainability costs you, you're doing it wrong.
Absolutely right. Absolutely, Dawn. Thank you so much. I believe exactly in what you just said. Completely. It's your path to profit, actually.
And Paul, I think you also had something to share. You did write in the chat box in case we missed it. Could you please share?
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. Actually, during my time stuck here, I was reading this book. I don't know if you can read that. Concrete, a 7,000-year history. And I used to be a civil engineer before I became an accountant. So, concrete.
Interesting.
Concrete is a topic that actually is very fascinating. But one of the interesting, or rather very concerning statistics that comes out of this is nearly 18% of global CO2 comes from the current method of producing cement from burning limestone. So I just wanted to ask, what are the cement companies actually doing about finding alternatives to reduce that CO2 output, given the enormous
fabulous question. Fabulous question.
Thank you.
So let me share with you. We were at Holcim's headquarters in in Europe 2 years ago. And we asked the same question that you did. And the amazing answer we got, that there will be a time when there'll be no need to produce fresh building materials or fresh steel at all, because we will have done a full cycle reuse of the material from buildings that are coming down. I had not put my head around the fact that every building has a useful life. And at the end of it, you need to bring it down and reconvert it and reuse it. And there will be a point in time when the renewal and the reuse will balance itself out. So that's a very long-term answer to your question. But in the meantime, we are experimenting with new materials. We are experimenting with new kinds of chemistry. We have just launched 3 or 4. So for example, the new plant that we have built in Rajasthan of Ambuja Cement is a green plant. It uses no fossil fuels at all. It is based completely on renewables and on waste heat recovery. So we will have almost 54 megawatts of power being generated by recovering the waste heat. So the idea is that whatever we were wasting earlier, you can repurpose it and bring it back into a productive utilization. And that's a huge way to, as Dawn was mentioning earlier, convert what might appear at first brush to be a cost to a profit.
Thank you.
But it's very fascinating the way the world has begun to start thinking about reuse and recycle and geocycle and all of that. And if we really stop to think about it a little more deeply, in almost everything in life, we'll find this possible.
Well, we did that with steam generation. When we put up a small power plant in a city called Binghamton, New York, we wound up using the steam that was being generated from that. The steam was recycled to heat homes.
Absolutely.
So in addition to generating power, it was being used to heat homes. So you're absolutely right that you can make a lot of money return on investment, if you want to look at it, by recycling all these things around. And the same thing with plastics. Now plastics are being recycled in a big way. I was glad to read in one of the Indian websites that I look at every day that in Kerala they're using recycled plastics, shredding them and mixing them with asphalt to make roads. And those roads supposedly are going to be even better because it'll allow the water to sort of go off the road rather than get absorbed and break up the pavement. So, there are a lot of ways. Israel, you rightly said, is the champion of all this.
Absolutely.
And I think we all have to exchange that information around the world to help everybody. Without doing that, we are just going to be living in a vacuum.
Very true, Mr. Khandas. Thank you so much for that input. It's echoing deeply what I truly believe in.
May I?
Yes, Paul.
I don't know if you can see this.
We can.
This is the amount. This is the amount of plastic that is produced since 1960 to 2010. That is the scale of the problem that we face with plastic. So it's very good to hear that there are more than just recycling initiatives. I think it's one of our major problems. As we all know, there's a huge mass of this stuff floating out in the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
And I go to the beach nearly every day here, and I find plastic bottles washed up, and all sorts of plastic debris that comes floating in from the sea. It's big problem.
You know
It
what
breaks
I
our
don't
heart
understand,
every day to see all
what
that plastic washing up on our beaches. It really
what I
breaks
don't
my heart.
understand, what I don't understand is why other countries um, do not have deposits and returns on plastics. When I lived in New York for a period of about 10, 11 years in New York City, you saw a lot of poor people going around the city, going through the trash cans and just picking up cans and plastics because of the recycle value.
Recycling. Mhm.
And they would go to the vending machines and put it all in and take the money out. People were just discarding these. Now, if we had more of that around the world, perhaps it would benefit the poor because they would go scavenging through the recycle bins or what have you. But it would also help the recycle product itself. In fact, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and Dr. Pepper here are advertising jointly that how they get their bottles back and they reconvert them back into plastic and then make new bottles out of them. And it's a
Fabulous.
big ad on TV here every day.
I'll end with a Kumbh Mela story. You know, the largest gathering
Yeah.
of humanity anywhere in the world is what is called the Kumbh Mela, which is going on as we speak right now. And what they have there is a series of installations of the kind that you mentioned, Mr. Khanna, where if you put in a plastic discarded sort of glass or bottle or whatever, then on the other end, you get a small cup of tea. So that's
Yeah.
the incentive for
Yeah.
people to collect it and
That's
put it
good.
in. It
Actually,
cleans up
India,
the place and gives you an incentive.
yeah, but I think India has so many stories of, let's say, street urchins going through,
Correct.
garbage
Rag
everywhere.
pickers and
And I think
absolutely.
plastic recycling is probably the easiest thing that happens in India. But I
Right.
think the
Very
bigger
true.
problem is, the one that we cannot burn or use any other way. A lot
No,
of people talk about those
we need
plans.
to get the downstream reliances of the world to make biodegradable containers. And that's
Yes.
the big
Yes.
thrust that is now happening. They're being pushed into doing that. But, we can go on. This is a very emotive subject.
This is
We're
a
already
very,
beyond time.
absolutely.
Yes.
So I will request Vineet or Charlotte to close the session.
So much, sir. Really appreciate